Nolan Arenado is an Arizona Diamondback. The deal is official. We will talk about what the trade means and what the long-term ramifications at the third base position are on this episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast. And hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of D-backs Under Review podcast. I'm your host, Mike McDermott, the founder and publisher of the D-backs Under Review newsletter, which we just released the newsletter on the Nolan Arenado trade and what that's going to mean. So if you want to get the written version, just read it. It's available at dbacks_underreview.com. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so that way you get notified when you get another episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast, the most in-depth podcast covering the Arizona Diamondbacks and what their news items are. Basically, kind of deep dive to news analysis, prospect coverage, and performance trends. Of course, we won't be getting into those until the regular season starts. But anyways, getting on with the topic, Nolan Arenado. The trade is complete. Because the Diamondbacks had an open 40-man roster spot, they did not have to make a corresponding move. So as I mentioned in the previous video, a little 9-minute quick hit on the Arenado trade. The Diamondbacks gave up right-hander Jack Martinez, their 8th-round pick in the 2025 draft, plus they only have to cover $11 million of the final $42 million that Arenado is getting between 2026 and 2027, the final 2 years of an 8-year extension he signed with the Rockies in 2019. So, kind of getting down to the gist of things, like I said, this is a good low-risk move for the Diamondbacks, and of course, the reason why the Diamondbacks didn't necessarily pay a lot for the Arenado trade is the leverage impact. Like Arenado had a no-trade clause for his entire contract, and of course, that limits the leverage that the Cardinals have to make the Diamondbacks eat more salary or give up a stronger prospect return, and that's also kind of the reason why the Diamondbacks put Ketel Marte on the market, because they'll be in a similar situation if they have to rebuild with their all-star second baseman. But I don't envision that happening. I don't see where the Diamondbacks would consider selling on Marte because he fits in that same window as Geraldo Perdomo and Corbin Carroll. But going back to Nolan Arenado, from the sound of things, Hazen made it sound like the Diamondbacks are going to play him at third base for the considerable part of the future, and that has a big downwind effect on who plays. Like I said, in the newsletter that I mentioned, Jordan Lawlar and Blaze Alexander, as you can see in the topics, that's going to be part of this podcast episode. And also I mentioned Ildemaro Vargas, who signed a minor league deal not too long ago. I think that was one of the earlier episodes of the podcast, covered that. And Vargas certainly is an option at third base. So I think it's a situation where Arenado is going to get the majority of the starts at third base. Maybe not 140. I don't see a 140 start season for Arenado at third, especially considering his age and his declining bat. But I see it's more than an Evan Longoria bench mentor role. I think he's going to be playing the primary starts. We're talking 110 to 120, and maybe you divvy up give him another 10 games at DH. As we look at the Diamondbacks DH situation, Del Castillo is probably going to start about 90 to 100 games against right-hand pitching, and that leaves you the other 1/3 of the season where you're going to face a lefty. And there are plenty of lefties in the division, of course. Blake Snell being one of them. If you look at the Giants, they got Robbie Ray as a left-hander. I'm not sure if Framber Valdez is going to join the division. I think the Giants were listed as one of the teams, although I think it's come at one point, but I think they're out on him. But the fact the Diamondbacks don't really have a true left-hand option DH, but they have a lot of right-hand bats between Blaze Alexander, Jordan Lawlar, Gabriel Moreno, maybe who else they pick up at first base, possibly, although most likely whoever their first base option is going to start at first base against lefties. Who else? And then who else? Arenado obviously is an option as well. I don't think they'll play James McCann at DH, but those are certainly the names that you would put in at the position, and they could just rotate guys around. Ketel Marte, I think, is another one. Kind of names that you rotate around. Hazen seemed to push back against the idea of Ketel Marte getting more starts at DH. I think before the Arenado trade, there was a good chance that Alexander could pick up 20 to 30 starts at second base. And of course, now Alexander's a super utility guy. Even though Roster Resource has him listed as left fielder, I think he's more super utility in this situation where he is He's going to get starts in left, center, because Alek Thomas needs a platoon partner. He's going to get games at third base and second base when Marte and Arenado are either off or are DHing. Of course, so we don't want to get too deep into how much Alexander gets into until we move on to the second topic. But so when you look at the situation, like I said, it was a low-risk flyer. The Diamondbacks had all the leverage in the deal to make the trade. So the Cardinals, because Arenado's no trade clause, he was willing to wait for the Diamondbacks, obviously, since the trade did happen. And Arenado, being an Arizona resident, certainly increases the likelihood he would do that, and he's pretty familiar with the facility that he's going to in the spring training, since it's a facility he spent 10 years in with his time with the Rockies. So he's certainly familiar with Salt River Fields and the different fields on there. So that's certainly good news for him. And the way it looks for the Diamondbacks is like it's a situation where if someone emerges, like let's say Jordan Lawlar figures out a hit and maybe learns defensively at third base, he might be a better long-term play. Maybe you consider that. Or also another thing I wrote in the newsletter is Arenado, if he still has it, if he's still at least a starting caliber player, he forms that bridge to Lou James Groover. And Groover I have him as a late 2020 6 ETA, but I mentioned the possibility that an Arenado injury could accelerate his time to the major leagues if it's a long-term injury. Let's say Arenado suffers, it's kind of difficult to explain what would be a long-term injury for a position player. It's easier to do so with pitching. Of course, pitching depth obviously you need more of to get through a season versus hitting, but let's say Arenado sprains his wrist or something, I think the best injury, and obviously I hope this doesn't happen to him, he gets hit in the wrist in the pitch and it breaks. That would be the worst case scenario I can think of injury-wise. If that were to happen, I think that's a situation where Groover would get pushed in the line, whereas where you look at a minor injury, the Diamondbacks could have any of their multitude of infielders cover for a short-term injury if we're talking within a month as your time frame. But anyways, that's kind of just how the gist of it is. Again, it's a low-risk flyer by the Diamondbacks. Arenado is still a good defender by the metrics at +6 defensive runs saved and +3 outs above average at third base, although the arm's certainly not as strong as it was in his Rocky days. But he still has a very quick release and the ability to throw off platform from his time with the Cardinals. He can still make plays that most third basemen cannot. And when you look also, another area that Arenado contributes is the clubhouse leadership. And you look at the 2025 Diamondbacks, that was, I think, one of the biggest issues that no one really talked about. I think there was certainly a clubhouse problem. It's kind of started with the bullpen kind of coming apart, and then once Puck and Martinez both got injured at the same time, the bullpen was never the same. And then, and when I say that in April, when Martinez went through the dead arm phase, and Puck had that elbow sprain that ended up turning into shoulder, internal brace surgery for Puck. And it was kind of a situation where losing, and then it wasn't necessarily, I don't know if it was necessarily the best, I guess you can say, well-knit group, of course. You had some pretty good clubhouse guys in there. Like, I don't think Josh Naylor was a negative clubhouse presence. And then you have Eugenio Suarez, who was in there. But it didn't necessarily have that guy, an Evan Longoria type, that could lead this team from inside the walls. And they had that guy also in 2024 with Jock Peterson. But they didn't have it in 2025, and it kind of felt like the team started to unfold at adversity, kind of an adversity situation. I think they did better after the trade deadline. Like I said, they went from 51 and 59 on August 2nd to 80 and 82. So that's a 29 and 23 finish to the season. It was a 29-23, you play that kind of ball for the rest of the season, you're making the playoffs. So I think the addition of Arenado to the clubhouse, I think, is the Diamondbacks a bit of a compass and a player that's been there for a long time and should hold his teammates accountable throughout the year. I think having that type of guy is going to be very beneficial for the Diamondbacks moving forward. So as we talk about what Arenado brings to the team, we have to also talk about what the impact of the trade does in regards to the futures of both Blaze Alexander and Jordan Lawlar. I already briefly mentioned this with Blaze Alexander. Alexander basically becomes a super utility player. I'm not sure how good his defense is at shortstop, although Jordan Lawlar can cover shortstop if Geraldo Perdomo were to go down. So I don't necessarily think Blaze needs to play shortstop to be an effective utility guy. Of course, you can't be a super utility guy if you can't play shortstop. I think it was a quote from Torrey that mentioned that. It's like a true utility player can play shortstop. But between Alexander obviously came up as a shortstop, didn't quite hack it his first year in the major leagues. That's why the Diamondbacks had to turn to Kevin Newman in 2024, which of course was a decision that worked out well in their favor, as Newman turned out to be a very good shortstop, especially in that time period without Perdomo, and then he was a very good utility player after Perdomo came out the IL. Like I said, although Newman wasn't able to repeat that in 2025. But then you look at Alexander, obviously he can pick it at third base. He was one of the better defenders at the end of the year. So if Arenado were to go down, Alexander is your everyday third baseman. Kind of drops from that super utility to an everyday third baseman on a short-term injury. And then you could also look at Jordan Lawlar, though I think Tyler Locker there might disagree about Jordan Lawlar's abilities as a third baseman. Or at least his ability to make the throws from third base. So Alexander becomes a super utility guy. Not sure what you're going to do with Jordan Lawlar. I feel like with the Diamondbacks outfield situation, especially following the McCarthy trade, the Diamondbacks don't have as much outfield depth. And there's a lot of question marks. Like I said, Alek Thomas, is he a useful player? Jorge Barrosa, what does he provide? And you have two open spots as a result of, I guess you can say, I guess I'm trying to think of the right word here, but I guess you can say unreliable. You're not sure what you're going to get out of Thomas and Barrosa. You look at Thomas's track record, it hasn't been very good offensively. I think he's a career, I'm going to double check, but it's a 76 OPS plus, I believe, is his career marks. Yeah, 76 OPS plus. And of course, you know me, I'm a WRC plus guy, but they're pretty interchangeable over a long-term sample. So 76 OPS plus. Thomas is not, and this is bad because Thomas is not an elite defensive player anymore. Of course, there is a perception that Alek Thomas is a great center fielder, but the metrics have not shown as such since 2023 in defensive runs saved, and then outs above average. He was average in 23, slightly below in 24, and then average in 25. Although we don't necessarily want to count 2024 because he's injured all year and had that hamstring. I'm not sure if that affects his defense, but he doesn't have the injury excuse in 2025. It's kind of pulling up Thomas' StatCast real quick. 0 OAA, slightly above the 50th percentile. So we can just assume moving forward that Thomas is an average center fielder, which of course is problematic when you're a 76 OPS plus guy and don't offer a lot of base running value as a result. So Diamondbacks certainly have to think about the long-term future of the center field. Unfortunately, there are no prospects that are going to make an impact in 2026. Drew Jones might be the first to get there. It's like Caldwell maybe a year later. Look at Caldwell in 27. Drew Jones at the end of the year, if everything goes well. Beginning of next year, and then if things go moderately well, he's certainly going to be in competition for a job in 27. Opening day 27. I think that's where my ETA is with Drew Jones, is opening day 2027. But moving back to the Blaze Alexander, Jordan Lawlar impact, it's like, hypothetically, you want one of the two to settle. You want Lawlar to settle into an everyday position, because I feel like the problem with Lawlar is the bat more so than the glove. Lawlar is the faster player of the two, and he certainly has wheels. Like I said, his sprint speed metrics. Of course, if you ever go to a Diamondbacks game, if you ever look on the scoreboard, there's like two different sprint speeds. If you compare the two, I believe Jordan Lawlar has the faster sprint speed of the two. Of course, how fast you can run in a straight line really doesn't matter. How well you play the outfield, especially considering the Diamondbacks have these, well, with the Kansas City Royals bringing their fences in 10 feet, Diamondbacks might have the second biggest outfield in baseball. Biggest field. I think we'll go with biggest field. I'm not sure. That includes foul territory on the infield. You look at Jordan Lawlar's sprint speed, 29.7 in the 98th percentile. I think Alexander's a little bit further down. You go from plus to just above average. You can look these up on 86 percentile. So yeah, 86 percentile is plus. If you ever do a normal probability chart, and 50% is right down the middle, And plus is considered one standard deviation. And if you go through a thing, one standard deviation plus one standard deviation is the 84th percentile. And I'm hoping I'm not nerding too much, but with a sprint speed in the 86th percentile, we can call that plus, which is 60. If you ever wanted to see it on a prospect scouting report, that's 60 on a 2080 scale. Gotta love StatCast. So, like I said, Jordan Lawlar, I think, is the better fit for the outfield, although Alexander certainly has more experience in the outfield. Ask Alex Bregman about that. I feel like Lawlar has better defensive instincts than Alexander, so I think a defensive position change might be more helpful, although Lawlar struggled to play both second and third base in the major leagues in 2025, whereas Alexander easily handled the switch to third, although it was also his second year in the majors, because he got some pretty decent run in 2024, whereas Lawlar didn't really have much run in 23. So with Lawlar, I think, again, you give him a looks in center field. Like Thomas certainly needs to come off the field against lefties. You would play Lawlar in that situation. Maybe Lawlar's your center fielder against lefties. Or Lawlar becomes your everyday left fielder situation where it's like, okay, just get his bat in the lineup, let him develop. We don't necessarily have, and if we need coverage, defensive coverage, we'll put Jorge Barosa in there. Like, Barosa is probably the best defensive outfielder on the current 40-man roster. And of course, this is probably the second best defensive outfielder in the organization after Drew Jones. So I do think, like, Barosa is your fourth outfielder. You're fine with him as your fourth outfielder, kind of interchangeable with Jake McCarthy. I'm not entirely sold on Barosa being more than just a fourth, fifth outfielder. At the end of 2025 was kind of his first run because Diamondbacks tried to hold it together with McCarthy, Thomas, and Carroll, and only Carroll could kind of emerge as a go-to. So I'm looking at Jorge Barosa's StatCast metrics. They're not good. Although I don't know how much you can trade, but then at the same time, you're looking at an outfielder with +4 outs above average. Now, as your fourth outfielder, if he shows any more offense in that bat, because Barosa's fast, I think Barosa's a guy who could put up 20 steals in a season if he got 450 plate appearances and had a league average on-base percentage, although I'm not sure he'll be able to hit major league pitching. As I said, his StatCast metrics are pretty poor, and he's got pretty slow bat in terms of raw bat speed metrics. This will be kind of an interesting situation. He's going to have to improve the strikeout and walk rates as well to be a viable major league hitter. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. The out of options in the situation he finds himself in, Barosa is one of many position players in the Diamondbacks that are out of options. They already traded one away in Jake McCarthy. Blaze Alexander is another, and then Jorge Barosa is another bat as well. Whereas you look at Jordan Lawlar and Alek Thomas, both have one option remaining, so the Diamondbacks do have some roster flexibility with their outfield if they needed to make that move. Now, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Lawlar in spring training as he get more reps in the outfield, though you want to keep him kind of ready on the infield as well in case there's an injury to Arenado or Geraldo Perdomo on the left side. I feel like Lawlar's your backup shortstop, and that's the position you can easily default to the most. If something were to happen, when you guys run at shortstop at the end of 2023, I thought he looked fine defensively. He's not an elite defensive shortstop, but he's an above average defensive shortstop if they had to replace Perdomo for a stretch. But otherwise, like I said, I'd like to see him get reps in both left and center field. Same with Alexander as well. So we are 19 minutes into this podcast episode. If you're watching this far in, make sure to leave a comment and answer which position do you think Jordan Lawlar will play for the Diamondbacks in 2026 the most. Of course, my answer is left field, but otherwise you can answer with yourself with shortstop, third base, left field, center field, second base. Those are possibilities as well. So moving on to finally the Diamondbacks do something with their bullpen. So again, if we're almost 20 minutes into the video. If you've made it this far in, please like the video, hit that subscribe button, please, and turn on the bell for notifications. That way, YouTube notifies you that when the next episode comes up, and we publish twice a week, every Monday and Friday, on the dbacks Under Review YouTube channel. And that way, of course, getting into that schedule, so you get used to it and you know when each one comes up. But otherwise, like I said, the Diamondbacks finally make a move with their bullpen. They signed 2 relievers this week. Jonathan Loaisiga kind of slipped under the radar in the Arenado trade news. That signing was announced, a minor league deal for a high upside arm. So this is certainly in the same playbook as Shelby Miller last year. Loaisiga is just under 97 miles an hour with a 4-seamer and a sinker. Throws a useful slider and a changeup as well. So he's certainly a guy, if healthy and productive, will be in the mix for the back end of the bullpen. I don't think he should be named the closer unless he earns it. The situation, if he's like just downright straight up nasty in spring training, maybe you give him the job. Then they kind of bounce that out with a more sure signing with Taylor Clarke. I don't think the numbers are in yet with Clarke at the time of this recording. I'm going to double check real quick. Of course, I have a fun story with Clarke that I'd like to share when we get there. But let's see. I don't see anything yet, so we'll just assume that it's something. So we know that the 2 Diamondbacks relievers that they were in on were Pete Fairbanks. They didn't sign him. He went to the Marlins. Pierce Johnson was another name they were linked to in the winter meetings. He signed a $6.5 million deal with the Reds, so I assume he was priced out. So we'll assume Clarke's probably in the $4 to $5 million range until proven otherwise, and I'll put a comment down once we get the actual number on it. So you look at Loaisiga, that's an upside play. Health is an issue. He's only appeared in 50 games since the 2023 season. That's why he's available for a minor league deal. You can't really count on him to be healthy over the given year. But he does have some very good underlying metrics on StatCast. If you pull up Loaisiga on StatCast, as you're watching this video, you'll notice that Loaisiga has excellent underlying stats. I think we look at, he has one of the best chase rates in baseball. It was over 40%, and that maybe signals how good his sinker was, as well as his sweeperish curveball. And I say sweeperish, it's kind of a pitch that isn't necessarily a traditional curveball. Like I said, it kind of features sweeper shape at 0 inches induced vertical break and 10 inches glove size sweep, 8 inches glove size sweep. I almost read the wrong stat. So I think it's a sweeper shape. I could be wrong. Again, these are cameras that are better trained for this thing than I am, although I have my thoughts. So you have a sinker, cutter, changeup, sweeper combination for Loaisiga, which is fine for a reliever because his arsenal's more east-west, kind of in that Brandon Garcia, Juan Burgos mode, where he's going to pelt you with arm side with sinkers and changeups, and then he's going to go to his cutter and sweeper for glove side change of pace. He's certainly an option in the back in the bullpen. Like I said, 40% chase rate, average exit velocity is 86 miles an hour. And you look at the expected metrics, a 237 expected batting average and a 356 expected ERA, which of course the 356 ERA would be excellent for the Diamondbacks bullpen. You're looking at what I call a useful reliever. When I say useful reliever, I mean someone who doesn't lose you games. And will typically post a shutdown to meltdown ratio of 3, at least 2.5. We'll do 2.5 because I'm throwing Jalen Beeks into the from 2025 into the useful reliever category. So, and I'm also throwing Taylor Clarke into the useful reliever category as well. So I'm going to pull it up on Fangraphs because the shutdown meltdown strats are only on Fangraphs, unfortunately. So I'm going to, and it's a win probability stat on Fangraphs. If you ever look up the leaderboard, we're going to pull up the Yankees first because we want Loaisiga, and then we'll mention Clarke. So unfortunately, they have 3 qualified relievers. 2 of them went to the Mets this offseason with Luke Weaver and Devin Williams. I should get former Diamondback names correct. All right. Loaisiga. Okay, 7 shutdowns, 9 meltdowns. No, hopefully that doesn't. It looks like that's not necessarily a great metric if you project it forward. Although, like I said, year to year, win probability metrics don't necessarily stick to year to year. It's how well he's pitching, and you hope certainly the expected metrics translate into next year's numbers. So I'm going to be kind of curious if Loaisiga develops more swing and miss it looks like there is the makings for it. Like I said, a 40% chase rate and a 26% whiff rate. Somehow that only translated to an 18% strikeout rate. And maybe it's better sequencing and slightly better location might fix that. Like I said, he has a history of suppressing contact in his career. You look at his past numbers. Even if not necessarily a deadly strikeout arm, although he does have his his best year came. No, he does not have a history of striking out guys, although you look at 2019 to 2021, he was 22 to 26%. You'll certainly take those numbers. Although since his 2021 season, the strikeout rate has been astronomically low. But otherwise, like I said, contact suppression, doesn't walk guys, maybe more swing and miss potential with better sequencing and execution in 2-strike counts. So let's see, put away rate. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at the metrics for Loaisiga. I don't know how he got an 18% strikeout rate. Maybe fewer sweepers on 2-strike counts would help. I don't know, but that's pretty much with him. Like I said, it's an upside play. Loaisiga, I think, if healthy, is certainly going to be one of the late inning arms. Another late inning arm potential is Taylor Clarke. Of course, Diamondbacks fans should be familiar with Taylor Clarke, who was a third-round draft pick by the team and came up as a starter. That didn't quite work out, and they moved him into the bullpen and was non-tendered after the 2021 season, to my chagrin, instead of paying him $1 million. And he ended up bouncing around a little bit. I think he was with the Royals. This is the Royals last year. Of course, now he's back with the Diamondbacks. You look at Taylor Clarke's underlying metrics on StatCast, kind of towards the middle. He's kind of a league average arm, I think, whose main, I guess you say, run prevention skills is he just doesn't walk guys. 4% walk rate, and unlike Brandon Pfaadt, doesn't give up a crap ton of hard contact to throw strikes. Of course, like I said, an above average chase rate, doesn't necessarily get a lot of swing and miss. I don't think he necessarily has a plus offering with the kind of the usage standpoint. I think the big thing was kind of streamlining that arsenal more as a traditional reliever. If you look at his pitch usage metrics, which you can see under his statistics on the StatCast page, if you go to Baseball Savant and you look up Taylor Clarke's page in the search, one thing you notice from 2025, obviously, besides the good numbers, and unsustainably low 0.85 whip, he's certainly going to give up more hits. Thing I noticed is he's using his slider more against right-handers. Maybe a sinker slider approach against righties, where you see 50% sliders and 29% sinkers while mixing in the occasional four-seamer and changeup. Because I think that's certainly a much more streamlined arsenal. And then against lefties, it's a fastball, slider, changeup, mix it up situation. I like the pitch usage from lefties and righties alike, because he's going to face a lot of lefties late in the game if he's a late inning arm. So having some success in that department, I feel like Clarke is certainly going to be a setup man. I don't think the Diamondbacks should be done. I think Loaisiga and Clarke are not enough to make a competitive bullpen, unless you want to roll the dice on guys that haven't done it, that haven't proven themselves yet, which isn't necessarily a bad strategy if it works out. But if it doesn't work out, Hazen's got egg on his face. So I feel like with the bullpen, again, Hazen's made 2 good moves this week. Needs to make more. Get that closer. Neither guy they signed this week is that guy. But certainly as a bridge to that closer, we're fine with that. And then and they can stay in that setup role once Puck and Martinez come back, and that's going to be key, because I like the numbers with Clarke. Again, a 21% strikeout rate compared to a 4% walk rate is very good. Anything over 15 is I'm going to approve of. If you subtract the walk rate from the strikeout rate, that usually is a good sign of, it's not 1-to-1, but it's a good sign of the ability to command the ball. I use strikeout rate minus walk rate, or K minus BB percent. Of course, BB being based on balls. So as we kind of climb in, like I said, into the final thing the Diamondbacks need to do, like I said, they need one more reliever, and then get that right-hand first base bat. Of course, would it be nice to get Paul Goldschmidt? Absolutely. Now that it's a situation where the Diamondbacks can get Paul Goldschmidt, and of course, John Gambadoro did not throw cold water on the idea of the Arenado trade preventing the Diamondbacks from landing Goldschmidt, although there's the possibility of Arenado starting that right-hand bat at first base if they wanted to go that route and play Blaze more at third base against lefties. That's one route they can go. Although I like the idea of adding a lefty killer to the lineup. Like, Paul Goldschmidt's numbers against lefties are insane. Of course, I think this is like the 5th time I've talked about Paul Goldschmidt on this podcast out of, 15 episodes if we count the Arenado trade reaction. So obviously, I feel like Goldschmidt for $5 to $6 million would be the perfect way to close out the position group setting. Again, get one more reliever. Maybe you add more starter depth to the minor leagues. Like, Thomas Hatch obviously was one minor league signing, although I don't see Hatch as a difference maker for the Diamondbacks, as more than maybe a bulk reliever that eats up innings when the Diamondbacks need a long man for a week or so. But otherwise, like I said, get that back inning guy, get Goldie, maybe look at an outfielder, and if you get but worst case scenario, at least get the closer. And then you can call it an off season. Once those moves are made, we'll talk about that. But more or less. Considering the Diamondbacks have held on to Marte, and it doesn't feel like they've made a bad move since. Hazen's in a pretty good place, even though I think the Diamondbacks are a low 80s win team going into the season. And maybe if things go well, they can get to 86, 87 wins, and maybe you make a run at the wild card. That's the best. I feel like that's the best case scenario for the Diamondbacks in 2026. So that's pretty much what I have to say on the Arenado trade and what that means, plus the Diamondbacks' 2 reliever signings over the week and what they need to do at the end of the offseason. So if you've made it all the way to the end of the video, you have an insane attention span. Thank you for making it all the way down here. You are definitely a die-hard fan at this point. If you have made it into this video, please consider subscribing. Again, like the video, hit that bell for notifications, although you probably already have if you're this far in, and comment down below what you want to see the Diamondbacks do, what reliever, and if they should sign Paul Goldschmidt, basically. So again, this is Mike McDermott from the dbacks Under Review podcast. You can check out my newsletter at dbacks_under-review.com. But otherwise, I'm going to be signing off. I'll see you guys on Monday as we talk about hopefully more moves between now and then.